Hello and welcome everybody to our third topic for this live show. If you're joining us live, thanks so much for being here. Be sure to like and comment in chat and let us know how you're enjoying the show itself. And beyond that, today's third topic, we're going to jump into Yoshi-P's latest letter to the community. This is hopefully putting a bow on the Savage nerf and the changes and like the miscalculations they've made. And I have not yet read this. Chris has been able to kind of peruse it a little bit, so I'm going to let him take over and actually start breaking down this letter, and then we're going to discuss it. As always, you can sound off in the comments with your own thoughts, your own theories, how you received this, positive or negative. Chris, take it away.
And as we put a bow on this, next week on Twitch, I'm going to be playing 3.1 to 3.55 for my first time. So if you guys want to see me clear Heaven's Word post MSQ, then come hang out there. So with that, let's get going. Hello, this is Naoki Yoshida, producer and director of Final Fantasy XIV. There has been a lot of discussion surrounding our explanation for adjusting the HP of the boss in Abyssos, the 8th Circle Savage, P8S, in patch 6.21, as well as the necessity of the adjustment itself. Firstly, please allow me to apologize for the disruption caused by the balancing issue and for any offense resulting from the insufficient explanation we initially provided. In this post, I hope to clear up any misunderstandings as to how and why this adjustment was made. The reason for the HP adjustment. As was explained in the 6.21 notes, a miscalculation on our part resulted in the boss's HP being roughly 1% too high in comparison to the difficulty of the previous 4th stage Savage Rage. We do, of course, understand and appreciate that many players nevertheless honed their ability rotations, raised item levels, repeated the fight over and over and over to claim victory. Having the HP set to this higher value, however, had other undesirable consequences, including certain jobs being excluded from party recruitment, a growing dissatisfaction with the overly punishing degree of difficulty. As our miscalculation was the root cause of these issues, we decided the best course of action was to explain our mistake and correct the inflated HP to the value it should have been in the first place. This type of correction has little precedence in Final Fantasy XIV's development, and although the discussion was made after considerable debate, we once again apologize for the impact it had on player enjoyment. The source of the miscalculation. Well, this issue was touched upon in the patch notes, but allow me to explain our balancing process in further detail. Firstly, the development team bases adjustments on the following premise, that the top percentage of players are overwhelmingly better at the game than we are. We regret not stating this more clearly in previous explanation, but said premise is the reason why we do not release content tuned precisely as it was when the battle team's battle testers cleared it. We always add a little bit extra to the boss values before rechecking the fight and releasing it live. The team responsible for balancing boss fights does so without debug commands and at the appropriate item level, employing available materia, food, and medicines while experimenting with mitigating actions and various job compositions. Yet, we recognize that the player skill far exceeds our own. If we were to ship content with the same values which challenged our battle team, the top raiders would be deprived of that by the skin of your teeth victory in the initial week of release. Based on the team's skill and our experience, that little bit extra usually translates to a balanced test clear value plus or minus 1 to 2% HP, plus 1 to 2 HP.
It looks like HP. Plus 1 or 2.
Just plus, yeah. 1 or 2. Yeah. I was like, I don't think minus. I don't think they're better. Plus 1 or 2% HP. And the final values account for other mathematical factors too, of course, such as the estimated damage the party could deal from the moment of victory to the end of the time limit, as well as the total burst damage potential based on frequency and amount inflicted. These numbers, these various calculations are based on what we are referencing when we said our team's performance was higher than anticipated. This latest installment features a boss closely tied to the dark past of a major character, and so we were focused on making this battle even more of a challenge than usual. As such, the battle team spent an inordinate amount of time together designing and testing the fight mechanics, which in turn led them to improving party coordination and communication beyond what they might usually achieve for a given boss fight. Final adjustments were, however, still based on the team's victory data. And so the little bit extra we added for the release proved to be that little bit too much. Reasons aside, our adjustments were off by that crucial 1%, and we again offer our apologies to those whose gaming experience was adversely affected by the correction and insufficient explanation. A high difficulty raid is a special kind of battle. We want players to enjoy a satisfying hard won victory, and we keep that ideal in mind when making tweaks and balance adjustments. Although we failed to walk that delicate line this time, the experience will help us to design a more perfectly thrilling battle in the future. Now, why adjust the duty rather than the job balance? When balancing jobs, each job's base numbers at the applicable item level are adjusted with respect to the difficulty of playing that particular job and its rotation, as well as its support actions and their effects. Naturally, the above factors are also affected by the mechanics and combination thereof at work in each battle, meaning that every job's numbers will not necessarily be at ideal values during all available battles. In addition to this inherent variance, there are indeed times when our calculations or adjustments are incorrect, producing damage numbers lower than intended and requiring subsequent strengthening of a job. In this case, when considering job balance more broadly, the jobs that needed emergency adjustments in this fashion were Paladin and Warrior. However, the aforementioned issue with Abyssos the Eighth Circle Savage also caused certain jobs to be better suited to the raid than others, and made the damage check required to clear extremely strict, resulting in a situation where players felt obligated to choose jobs with higher damage output when attempting the raid. Attempting to ameliorate this by buffing certain jobs without making changes to the raid itself would have negatively impacted the overall balance within each role and likely resulted in disappointment for those whose jobs were already dealing sufficient damage for the raid and therefore received no adjustments. Unfortunately, adjusting all jobs in such a short period is not feasible. Thus, the root cause of the issue was a mistake from balancing the duty, and an immediate fix that maintains role balance was required. It is a game design fundamental as well as our policy that rather than adjust the jobs to suit each battle, we balance the jobs independently and only then set the battle content difficulty. Changing the job balance for one single duty would end up causing more problems than it solves. So we decided to address the problem in the manner we did, by ameliorating the root cause. I appreciate that regardless of our rationale, this issue has been a source of frustration for many, and I apologize for that. I hope, however, that this has helped clarify our approach. In conclusion, the adjustment to Abyssos the Eighth Circle was never intended to be a nerf, but merely the correction of values that were set inappropriately by a fourth stage Savage raid to begin with. Nevertheless, I understand that it feels like a nerf for those who worked hard and were on the verge of clearing the fight as it was originally implemented, and I regret having caused such disappointment. As we strongly wish you to continue enjoying fiercely challenging Savage fights, particularly in the early days after release, will do our utmost to further improve the tuning of these battles. Furthermore, we will strive to better understand what our players think about such issues and improve our operational protocols, perhaps by waiting a week before implementing fixes, in addition to providing details on our perspective, so that if we again find ourselves in a similar situation, we may arrive at a solution that is more satisfying to everyone. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I sincerely apologize for any disruption that our error may have caused to your gameplay experience and appreciate your patience. Naoki Yoshida, Final Fantasy XIV producer and director.
So I have a couple of thoughts. First and foremost, like I always love how we are able to get so much detail into the thought process, the development process. And I think that's actually really valuable to us as a community. And also at the same time, both things can be true, is that it feels like from Walker that this has also been a year filled with apologies, with mistakes and errors. And I can't help, it doesn't mean what I'm going to say is true, but I can't help but thinking that with 16, with his added responsibilities, with all that's going on, like, I think it's Square Enix asking too much of Yoshi-P in this regard. And like, is this going to be a pattern that continues on until said release, or assuming that Yoshi-P gets his wish and gets to start working on a brand new MMO after 16's released? What do you think?
So I am working on a really big post for Gaming Kinda where I have had the chance to sit down and talk with Ren Karagani to represent the higher end players who do take a lot of this on week one, and have cleared the tier. And I also talked to Mo Raines, who puts a lot of time into Savage very early on, but on the much more casual party finder end of things, as well as watching and reading reactions from Zeph, Xeno, Happy, Quasi, like a whole gamut of players across a wide variety of skill sets and content types. And the overwhelming frustration is that the fight was clearable by, yes, less than maybe some previous tiers have had in the past, but it was clearable by a not insignificant number of teams and clears were continuing to happen. Gear would have naturally removed 1% off of this boss's, it's 1.7 million life off the boss's health. Gear would have naturally made that 1.7 million more achievable as the weeks went on. But job balance is going to be something that lingers. And yes, we need the gear to be able to ideally go into Criterion Savage with the highest item level possible. Yes, we need the gear to drop so that people don't feel like they're grinding right up against 6.3 because we think we're getting an ultimate next patch cycle. And loot lockouts, there is a limited number of loot lockouts in a roughly 266-day cycle between Savage raids. So I think my frustration here is that this acknowledges the issue with this one particular fight and explains it as a one-off mistake. And it's a very generous apology if that was the case. But whether it was 1% or 10%, this one fight, if this fight hadn't screwed up, a fight would have eventually screwed up, because everything I've learned over the last 24 hours as I've kind of gone to shape my opinion by more broadly understanding how people feel, is there are some fundamental combat designs that make job balance at high risk of always being screwed up based on changes they've made for Endwalker. And as a result, it's just a matter of time until any encounter is off by some unsurmountable percentage because the job balance is faulty. Like, at its nature, it's not an issue of like, a certain potency to be adjusted. Like, the whole mentality that they've taken to just designing any particular job and the system as a whole is just flawed in Shadowbringers or in Endwalker. And it's until they shift that, we're going to keep needing these adjustments.
Well, especially as we continue to add more and more jobs every expansion. Why I'd be very curious, especially to chat here on what I'm about to say, because I've heard this sentiment get louder and louder each expansion. That there's a group of people who would love to see nothing more than no jobs actually added as a part of an expansion, and have every job, that time spent on making a new job, have every job kind of receive kind of a deeper level of pass, a deeper level of work or adjustment or rework, or like essentially like, okay, because Yoshi-P's commented just on how long it takes to make these jobs and make them viable, that it's like, okay, like what if that time was spent on, like could you like take a look at 5 jobs in the course of it? Because like I say that like we got 2, but Summoner got a complete rework, and so we're starting to see kind of like, okay, we're going to add and we're also going to do some kind of rework. Would we end up seeing in the long run that being a value? Do you think that would be something that help kind of solve it? Because Yoshi-P also said that based off of Shadowbringers and Endwalker, we're going to get an idea of how all this stuff is connected together.
So the advantage of a consistent patch schedule is they know how fast they need to work, and we know how fast we need to consume the content to feel comfortable as players. The consistency is one of the things that Final Fantasy XIV offers in a way that no other MMO and game at all in game studio that I know of can match. Their consistency, their product management, their ability to say, we have the resources to make sure that the team can deliver consistently, and within that can ideally provide balance to the devs. And if they have times that they feel really great and they're working really great and they're inspired and they're working really fast, we'll use that to kind of level out the times that maybe they had a hard week at work. And we can manage all that instead of you being on this emotional roller coaster with us. And with very rare exception, this game runs like a bus or a train schedule. I mean, it is unbelievably predictable, and they communicate at set intervals in between. So we always know there's always an announcement. The train will be here in 20 minutes. The train will be here in 10 minutes. And so it's been incredible. The downside of that is when it comes to job balance and when it comes to job design is when do you do it? The advantage that World of Warcraft accidentally causes by having these 9,000 day patch cycles is there's a lot of time where the engine isn't moving. But if you are releasing content every 2 months and you're releasing major content in between on those 4-month intervals, when do you balance it, right? So if you balance this tier right up against the tier releasing, you frustrate people that are in the middle of solving it. If you balance it after this, you run the risk of screwing with Criterion that releases in 6.2.5. If you balance it after that, you risk screwing with Ultimate in 6.3. 6.3 is like, they're going to be people to take all of 6.3 to solve Ultimate. So then you risk screwing with 9 through 12 in 6.4. If you mess with that, why not push it to the expansion? And then in expansion, you're supposed to have 2 new jobs. How do you balance for those? If all these parts are moving, well, where do they slide in? So it's just,
well, we've also seen that happen in PvP this year with the patch. Like we got a whole different patch, and that caused all kinds of problems. That's where it's like back to kind of the thing. It's like we've seen a lot of different apologies, some that I don't feel are justified from Yoshi-P's perspective, apologizing for the fact of this global pandemic that couldn't get us servers, etc. Like I get that from a, you know what, like I'm sorry because it's like we're all in this together. That's a pain point. So I don't count that as that. But then we see like these little things that we haven't really seen happen before in terms of the experience, at least from my best memory. I do remember that it took a long time to actually take down Twin Tanya. I brought up that example at the start of this week where eventually somebody did clear it, but they had to go back and mechanically make some changes because they found like it was, you know, something within the RNG or how the twisters essentially kind of dominated the conversation. It was very, very, like, it took a lot longer for them to get it clear on that than they originally expected. But a part of that was exciting for a lot of players. And because I've seen even people say WoW takes at least over a week, but even from professional teams to actually get down all of these fights as well. So there's some interesting
reset.
Yeah.
It's over a week, which it's really weird. They see a reset. And then because it's a global race, what happens with the fact that EU and NA servers go off at different times? Like it's a whole thing. There's this whole meta aspect to solving the problem of a WoW raid that is outside of the boss mechanics.
Now, I do want to bring up, because it kind of touched on something you were talking about, and over in Twitch chat, PJ Errold says, has gatekeeping in Final Fantasy gotten so bad that a 1% change causes this much drama? And my perspective on it is that I think is if you actually, and this could be my bias because I obviously have an obsession and follow the 14 in the community for many, many years. I tend to see, and we've seen kind of in a pattern within the 14's community, usually around the 0.3, time frame, you end up seeing a lot more drama because there ends up being a little bit more burnout. Players really might not understand why they're starting to feel the way they're feeling about a game. But with Endwalker, we actually saw that actually kick off pretty early. Once the expansion was finished, you finished the story, all of a sudden you start hearing more and more people talking about like, oh my gosh, like, why am I not enjoying this game the way that I used to? I'm really confused. And that in and of itself, I was like, yeah, it's been a long journey. So I think that within the community itself, a couple of factors have happened. One, they concluded the story. So you're not actually getting 0.1, 2, and 3 really driving the rest of the expansion story and that kind of level of excitement. But you also have seen the increase in time between patches, which we think is the right call, but that gives a little bit more time to find faults and to find complaint and to find frustration. And then you also have a community that has been so also hyped up on the defense and the never say anything bad about this game, that all of a sudden when somebody's like, I'm really not enjoying this the way that I thought I might be would have, and then all of a sudden you run up against that side of things. I think this is kind of like one of those like perfect disasters that like it's not a disaster, but ultimately when people like start to really kind of look into it, it's like that's kind of what the cycle of games as a service is. We are in a I call it the 3 seasons of MMOs, or the 3 seasons of the service-based game: hype, grind, and bitch, and where you just complain and you get frustrated over it. And so I think that's just where we are at as a community. Not that you can't be hyped for what's coming, not that you can't be currently grinding in the game, but when you take this onto social media, like, yeah, what else are they going to talk about? Like, there's not news to talk about. We don't know much about, we know stuff, but we don't we're not getting any new information. As soon as that kicks up, then we go
Especially
right into a hype season.
Spoilers.
Right. Oh yeah. And you can't talk spoilers. And it's like, hey, we got 9 years of like stuff that it's like, oh, you're new to the game. That's going to completely change what we were able to talk about with you guys. So, like, and that's a reality that we're all facing. So that's my perspective on what P. Gerald's talking about, that this has always been a part of the community. The reason why it feels more prevalent is because of the things that I just mentioned. What do you think, Chris?
I think, first of all, we are incredibly blessed that a lot of times the actual spark that causes drama in the 14 community is very small. Compared to what other games may have had to live through or other industries may have had to live through, where a lot of times we are complaining about balance that is within a couple percentage points. We are complaining about something that and people are still achieving. Like we are complaining about something small. But second of all, usually the spark itself, I think a lot of times it gets the headline, right? Because it's the example, it's the living example. I'm not making up a hypothetical situation. This is the situation. But it represents something much larger. And so there's usually something bubbling up. And because this community has not always had a historical community-wide ability to discuss any shortcomings in the game, anybody's frustration with the game tends to get bottled up. And so all this frustration kind of bubbles and bubbles and bubbles. And the moment there's a chance to talk about it, they can talk about it. And so you are seeing people talk about, okay, I had a lot of issues with the 2-minute burst window change for Endwalker. I had a lot of issues with the following job changes. And those issues aren't new to this tier. They've been there and they've been there. And the person's been like, I don't like this. It's going to cause a problem at some point. I don't like this. It's going to cause a problem at some point. But because everything was going fine, people were like, oh, you're just crying wolf. You're just making a mountain out of a molehill. You're just making it a bigger deal than it has to be. It's not like whatever you're complaining about is stopping people from clearing fights until it is.
Yeah.
And then people are like, see, I told you. And yes, it just happened to be a 1%, but the percentage change for a lot of the people that are really upset at this, the percentage change wasn't the problem. There were people who were already burned out with the way the combat system works because the 2-minute burst windows made this particular ultimate feel really hopeless sometimes. If you had a party member that slid outside the 2-minute window and that because they died, and you might as well wipe the whole pull. And previous versions of the combat system would have said, okay, let's think creatively. Let's shift some people's burst windows to the 30-second increment. Let's adjust. Let's make that time back up. And so the system itself has fostered a lot of this burnout going into this tier. And so I think some people's frustration, this is just where they're putting it, but it was already there. We just don't do a very good job talking about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it happens.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for that, P. Gerald, because I think it's interesting. And thank you, Cosmos, for joining at the tier 1. Appreciate that. $1 a month club. I really appreciate that support over here on YouTube. We like to try to make it as accessible as possible. So that level is such an important level for us. So thank you in that regards. At its core, we also saw a bunch of first-time chatters over here on Twitch. I love that I can see that. So welcome in Rylax and Noah's Mel. And thanks so much for stopping in and saying hi for the first time. So we're glad that you're here. At its core, man, like I'm just kind of curious to see where we obviously go from here, because we're going to see some more adjustments. We'll continue to see more adjustments. But what's also kind of like another thread that just kind of, is just singing in the back of my mind is Yoshi-P looking at Dragoon and Astro and then realizing, okay, we're going to have to save the things that we're doing for 7.0. And I do wonder if that ends up being like, hey, we're recognizing this too. We're getting that feedback too. But changing, I'm assuming that changing out of a 2-minute burst window isn't like, oh, let's just, adjust this, because they kind of already got their content schedule plan and all that kind of worked out. So ultimately, if this feedback ends up being something that it's like, okay, we see what we did here and make adjustments, maybe 7.0 is going to be a much more approachable take for a lot of players.
Well, I think this apology tells me that honestly, this seems like it muddies the waters more than it helps. I can tell that they're genuinely stressed about this, and they're trying to decide what to do. The other reason this is a big deal for anybody that hasn't been around the game for a long time is when he says this is kind of unprecedented. It's been a very, very, very long time since they've had to make changes like this. And the last time they had to make changes like this, the balance was substantially more off. So the question why we would bring back something that has not happened since like heaven's word. I think it was March of 2016 was the last time they had to make a balance change while content was relevant. And so when you're talking about something happening 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and you're dusting off this kind of capability, you're dusting off this, break in case of emergency acts, and you're going to take it to this content while people are still mid progression, it feels a little overblown when you're destroying this with an axe, like even if over 1%, like if it really is just 1%, why not just leave it? So there, you say, well, it's just 1%, so get over it. Well, then if it's just 1%, why do it? And so there's this circular argument of like, why did this need to happen in the first place? Because if it was really just 1%, you could have just trusted us to clear it. The counter argument to that is this is the first time we're ever getting Savage Dungeons, and they have said it's going to be item level relevant. So if you need people to have as much best in slot gear as possible by October 18th is my guess date. I guessed it, like that's just a guess. Speculation. October 18th. Mr. Happy guesses the same thing, so two of us will be wrong. And so like that's it. October 18th is our guess at when the half patch will drop. But either way, whenever Criterion Savage gets here, you need as many people getting through as many bosses of weekly lockouts as possible. You don't want 83 groups to clear, so you've got 660 characters with BIS, and everybody else is like, man, I've really been looking forward to the dungeons, and they can't do them. So like, I know there's things that the devs know that we don't know that might have also fueled this decision beyond this letter that they can't disclose to us. When does the Ultimate team need to say, hey, balance team, pencils down, we have a job to do? Because in theory, at some point, they need to be testing the Ultimate. And if it takes people like Lama Todd 120 hours of prog to clear an Ultimate, imagine what the testing team has to do to test different mitigations, different comps and all that. They have a hard job. Yeah. So I want to be respectful of that. I just question, would the best thing they could have done been to just do none of this?
Right. I think so. Honestly, that's the conclusion that I come down to, because people were getting clears. If nobody was getting clears, like if it was like, oh, even the upper echelon, because we know that as gear gets rolled out, as these things happen, like that 1% doesn't become a big thing. Now, I do appreciate Yoshi-P's explanation. I always love the insight into how they're thinking and about approaching it. Here's the thing, like, they made a change. I think, I don't know if I wouldn't want them to go back and say, all right, guys, okay, 1%. Like, I don't want that kind of ping pong decision-making process. Decision was made. However, in the future, I hope that they take that kind of thing into consideration, especially if people are getting clears. If people aren't getting those clears, that's the thing. And then essentially looking at what else, like ultimately why. And obviously certain jobs like that kind of violates the principle of bring the job, not the player. Bring the player, not the job, mindset. But that also then hits exactly the feedback we always tell, especially new players, like, hey, congratulations on getting the level cap. Please consider, at least having another job, whether it's in the same role or in another role, just so that if this stuff happens, because it's not always perfect. We see some jobs get favored over the others. That's the process of balance, right? The idea of balance being imperfect, having a perfect balance doesn't exist, but it means that balance is always a constant fluctuation state. Therefore, having a way that you're not starting right over from scratch, having to learn another job, doesn't mean you have to be the master of it. But just maybe have at least another job or two in the holster, so that when you got to switch off Warrior and go to Dark Knight. Okay, that's not a problem. I'm still a part of the raid. I'm not like grinding out all this stuff mad while grinding it out, that I can't play the job that I want. But at the end, I wish them luck. I think that I see Chad sounding off about the dungeons, Izzy, saying that they hope the new Criterion variant dungeons, etc., are good. I really need them to be, but beyond needing them to be good, I think it's important that as a community that we've been asking for this kind of content, we should absolutely make sure that we show up for it. So I think the difficulty levels will help ease that into it, but I think it's really going to be important overall. Chris, why don't you wrap up this segment, and then we'll wrap up our show for today.
Cool. Well, after this, guys, we stream 5 days a week on Twitch. As a reminder, at the end of this one, for anybody that's here and is expecting that, I am taking Friday the 23rd through the end of the month off for my first big long vacation, my first vacation since February. So my wife and I can celebrate 10 years of marriage. This is when it worked out with her work schedule to take off. And so we're going to take off that time and hopefully spend some time together. So I know we already have tickets to a comedy show, so we're going to go do that and have a good laugh together. So really excited to have that time off, but that does mean that there won't be stuff over on Twitch. And today I'm going to be working on SkySteel tools. So we'll keep at it. Thank you guys so much for being here. Today was awesome. We got 4 topics, I think. So
Yeah.
we like
random bonus topic, which was great. So guys, be sure to go hang out over on Twitch. Also, if you guys listen to the MP3 audios, would love a rating. Feel free to give us a rating, as that helps the discovery of the podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you for being here. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the show. Hopefully we'll see you in the next live show. And until then, take care.